Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we could.
Thank you. I had my first alcoholic drink at the age of 13, and I absolutely loved it. 5 years later, a lot of my friends were taking cocaine. I felt quite curious, and so I tried it. I didn't like it, but I persevered. And throughout the years, I used a combination of both. And on June the 3rd, 2013, I had been on a 4-day cocaine and alcohol-fueled binge. I was stood by a window on the 4th floor of a block of flats in London, contemplating ending my life. Obviously, that moment didn't come from nowhere. It was built slowly through disconnection and a lack of curiosity about connection. I was living alone in London. I'd pushed away family and friends. I'd stopped answering their calls. I numbed what I felt instead of sharing it. And without realizing it, my world became smaller and smaller. I felt completely disconnected from people, from purpose, from any real sense of hope. However, today, I'm over a decade sober. I'm a therapist working full-time at school helping young people. I'm a friend, a mentor, a speaker, but more importantly, I'm part of a community. And what I've come to understand is this: the opposite of addiction isn't just sobriety. It starts with curiosity, grows through connection, and in my experience, that connection is found in communities. To take you back, I left my hometown, the very place that we're in today. I told myself, there's nothing for me here, it's boring. Everybody knows each other. It's too small of a town. There's too many hills. You have to wait ages for a bus. And that I needed to escape. But the truth be told, it was much deeper than that. I didn't feel connected here either. Not to my friends or family. So I did what a lot of us do. I thought that if I changed my postcode, I could change my pen. So I moved to London. And at first, I thought it was amazing. Big city, bright lights, more people, more distractions. But internally, nothing had changed. I still felt empty and lonely. And that led me to take more cocaine and drink more. And that's what led me to the window. This is my personal story. But you don't have to feel emptiness and loneliness to stand by a window. You can feel it in a crowded place, on social media, in a relationship, even in the town that you grew up in. I always thought that change came from something big, a big breakthrough, a big decision. But it came from something much smaller than that. See, throughout my active addiction, a lot of people would say to me, why don't you try find a community? Why don't you reach out for help? Why don't you try meditation? Why don't you try journaling? Why don't you try walking in these lovely hills around your town? If I'm honest with you, I smiled, I nodded, and went about my day. But without realizing it, something was happening. The seed had been planted. And on the 3rd of June 2013, when I was contemplating ending my life. It blossomed. The next day after, I held my hand up and I asked for help for the first time in my life. See, the truth is I didn't want to die. And addiction is a killer. So I made a phone call. And this change came from something small, someone listening, someone empathizing. And they recommended I go to a recovery centre because there was people there who had been on a similar journey to me, but they were sober, and it seemed to be having good lives. So I went up, and it was across the road. I remember looking and thinking, do I really want to be part of the community? Was it really that bad, Simon? And I was walking up and down, and I was thinking, is this for me? And what I didn't realise, that when I looked across the road, a lady with long red hair had just been watching me the entire time, like this. And she said, "Are you Simon?" At first I wanted to lie and say, "No, I'm Derek, I'm lost." I said, "I am." And she said, "We've been expecting you." I felt like she'd given me a hug from across the street. She invited me in, and there were a few of us there. I sat down, she handed me a cup of tea. Us Brits love tea. I shared my story, she shared hers, and the rest of them shared their story. 4 years sober, 9 years sober, 20 years sober. There was a young person who was 30 days sober, and I thought, that's what I want. I felt hope. I felt part of a community. I felt warm. They offered me some suggestions. Maybe ask one of us here for help, a mentor. Get some service, like giving back, just like the lady with long red hair waiting for me outside. You could make cups of teas, you could put out the chairs. And then they said, start giving back to others. The next day after, I started my journey. 1 day sober, 2 days sober, 3 days, 1 week, 30 days. I felt part of life at last. I felt connected. I started to get promoted at work. I started to build a relationship with my mum and my brothers. I started to apologise to any people that I'd hurt in the past. And little by little, my life got very, very good. I would check in with my mentor every other day, just to check in and tell him where I'm at. It got to a point where I felt a pull, curiosity to try new things, just like other people had told me. So I started to try meditation, and I found a community who meditated. And at first, I found it very, very difficult. But I tried. I said to my mentor, I'd like to start taking photos. I love taking photos on my phone, uploading them onto Instagram, getting them likes. And he said, well, why don't you? So I found a community and started taking photos. I said I'd also like to change my career path. I'd like to start helping people and become a therapist. And he said, well, why don't you? So I embarked on many avenues and journeys. When you get sober, a lot of people start inviting you to things. They used to chuck me out of them. I've been best man at my friend's wedding. I've been a godfather. I'm a good friend today. And I was invited to a wedding in the south of Spain. And whilst I was there, I was taking photos and I thought I'd like to travel more, so I went up to Portugal and I went to Porto. And I wanted to get on this touristy train that I'd checked out. And what it does, it would take you along the river. I'd get off there and I'd walk back taking loads of photos. Whilst I was waiting for the train, there was two men stood in front of me. And when they got on the train, they sat in separate seats, right at the front. So what I did, I took out my camera and I started nudging one at the back of the head. And he said, "Would you like to sit here?" And I said, "I'd love to." And he said, "Will you do me a favour?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Will you take a photo of me and my husband?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So I started to take photos of this guy and his husband. And he said, "What have you been up to?" I said, I've been to a wedding." He said, "Oh yeah, plenty of drinking?" And whilst he mined the pint glass, the whole of Porto could have stopped. I had a deep feeling that he had been on a similar journey to me. And he was sober. Now I wanted to ask this guy, I was very curious. But as we started chatting, I didn't. And we both got off the train, and I just watched him go into the sun. 2 years later, a good dear friend of mine is going to New York, and he asked me if I'd like to go for 4 days. I said I'd love to. In the 4 days, we had 4 seasons, and I was invited to speak at a recovery centre. It was snowing, it was magical, and it was beautiful. I stood, shared my story for 20 minutes, and afterwards, a gentleman came up to me and he said, "Thank you very much for that." And he slowly took down his hood. And I looked at him and I said, "I know you." He said, "From here?" I said, "No, I've never been here before." And then it hit me, that connection, what I felt on the train. I said, "I took a photo of you and your husband on a train in Porto." He said, "Is that you?" And I said, "Yeah." And I couldn't believe it. Emotionally, all over the place. I said, "Can I take your number, please? I'd like to keep in contact with you." He said, "Sure." And in the midst of excitement, when I got back to my hotel, I realised I'd taken down his digits wrong. I only had 1 day left, and I couldn't make contact with George again. You know people who said try meditation? I kept on trying and kept on practicing. And one day, I was sat down on my bed, and I had this strong message come through. And it said, "Leave London and go back home to be with your mum and to be with your friends and help people in your hometown, in the recovery centres and further." I phoned my mentor and I said, "I've just had this message come through." He suggested that I listen to it. The next day, I went into work and handed in my notice. I was quite anxious. I had a good community, a great job where I'd been promoted a lot of times. But I felt this pull. Before going back, I went to visit my friend. This friend of mine was like a father. I lost mine at 8 years old to a heroin overdose. But this man, I could go to him for anything, whether I felt good, bad, or indifferent. I told him about my move. He told me to trust it too. I asked him how a friend of ours was doing. He was struggling. And I said, "How's he getting on with his journey?" And he said, he's not doing too bad. He's sober. I said, that's great. He said he got sober in New York. I said, that's brilliant. He's got a really good mentor. I said, great. Turns out, it was George from the train. We were both gobsmacked. I ended up moving back to my hometown. March the 2nd, 2020. That month, we went into lockdown. We couldn't attend our recovery centres, so we did what we did best. We went online. Who did I meet online? George. Deep connection. George was then able to help people in my community. I was able to help George and people within his community. And that is connection. We found a way out, a solution. I'm going to leave it on this. Throughout my sobriety, I felt some things that I needed to share, but I felt a bit of a burden, and I was going to my mentor quite a bit, so I suppressed them. It got to the point where it's unbearable, and I thought, I need to call him, I need to speak to someone. So I picked up the phone, and I said, I've been holding on for this for a while. And he said, will you do me a favour, please, Simon? He said, please don't suffer in silence. He said, bring it into the light and reach out so I can reach in. Thank you.